Good morning and welcome to Word Vancouver 2022. And our session today is called Mirrors and Magnification. I'd like to welcome all of our wonderful live audience members. Of course, we know that for a couple of years this wasn't possible to have you here. Today we have three authors who I'll introduce in just a minute. They'll be joining us remotely. I'm going to acknowledge that we are having this festival take place on the unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And I'll just also say that I'm coming over to join you today from Vancouver Island, where I reside on the traditional territories of the Cowichan tribes and Malahat Nation. So it's wonderful to have you here. And I want to acknowledge the sponsors. Without them, we couldn't have this festival. So we would like to thank the generous donors, the Canada Arts Council, the Canada Book Fund, the Canada Heritage Fund, Canada Periodical Fund, the BC Arts Council, BC Gaming, Creative BC, the City of Vancouver, DBVIA, the Joseph Wosk Family Foundation, the Hamber Foundation, the BC and Yukon Book Prizes, the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop, CWILL, Pace and Associates, the Crime Writers Association, the Federation of BC Writers, the Surrey Library, the Vancouver Public Library, and the League of Canadian Poets, the Writers Union of Canada. And for a full list of all our sponsors, you could go on the Word website. And of course, we want to thank SFU today, where we are holding the festival, and the Writers Studio, because this is a wonderful home this year for the festival, for this first hybrid festival. So today we have three authors who are joining us remotely. My name is Leanne Boschman, by the way, and I have the pleasure of welcoming Megan Jones, and I have the pleasure of welcoming Nancy Jo Cullen and Jason Purcell. And what we're going to do, because we're getting a slightly late start, I think what we can do is have each of the authors read for about 8 minutes. And then I'll have time for possibly one question, I think, at this point, to ask them about their poetry. And I'm hoping still that towards the end of the session, there may be time for comments and questions from the audience. What I wanted to say about these poets, because I was so happy to have the opportunity to get to know their work. They are poets who write in a way that challenges complacency through an embodied poetics. Their work is powerful. It traces the discomfort we experience in our bodies to the power relations that shape gender identity, consumer society, and notions of beauty, illness, and health. And I think that ultimately they evoke that sense of dis-ease we experience and how it's rooted in the social order and is deeply interconnected with the environment. So I really think you're in for a powerful poetic journey at this point. First of all, I would like to welcome Megan Fennya Jones. Her poetry has appeared in publications across North America, including Poetry Northwest, Room Magazine, and Prism International. In the anthology, The City Series #1, Vancouver, and the chapbook Normal Women. She lives in Vancouver. Welcome, Megan.
Hi, everyone. I'm so sorry I couldn't be there in person today. And I just wanted to start by thanking Word Vancouver and making sure that everyone can hear me. Yes? Okay. I'm going to read just a few poems from my book, The Program, which is out now from Ice House Poetry. This poem is called Fish Poem. I took a cab to your studio tonight because I decided not to go home with him. He showed me photos of the inside of Taylor Swift's apartment and said she was too famous to love. He writes love songs for pop stars. He wrote one for me once, and it pulled me to him like a fish hooked by its eye. After dinner, he pinned me against a wall with his hand on my throat. It all felt like the dark pull of a familiar tide. I'm telling you this now because I have a fantasy where I hurl my body at the tide so you can drag it out, wet and glistening. But you're not that kind of person, and you have a painting to finish. So I will walk home from your studio alone, leave the door unlocked for you. I write this poem before I fall asleep because its voice is another body in the house. This next poem I'm going to read is called Understanding Paintings. You say I don't understand paintings because I'm expecting too much. You tell me to describe only what I'm actually seeing. I see a red line, a screen door. I see a white machine, a dark hallway. Being deaf and nearly 7 feet tall, you say to be yourself is to be an artist. You say nothing new is out of bounds when you're already out of bounds. You dress in monochrome, big black boots, silver hearing aids curl around your ears. You look really good. A waiter says it best. Welcome to the Matrix. We see each other on Thursdays. Decide what you like, you say, and demand only this. Make a list of every perfect thing in the world and covet every single one. The first time you asked me to kiss you, I declined. You don't kiss your teacher. I'm just going to read one more poem. I'm going to find it here. Okay. This poem's called At the New York Agency. I wear brown leather pants to have my Polaroids taken by an intern who says my legs look like tree trunks. I walk home along Canal Street. Nobody likes Canal, but I like the ladies selling knockoff handbags and metal rings that stain my fingers. In Washington Square Park, a homeless man calls me beautiful, and I should be thankful. I should be on the elliptical, splitting my tree trunks into kindling. In Paris, people insulted my body in a language I didn't understand. That was so nice. That was so necessary. In Paris, I could see, I could actually feel the sky above my head. In New York, the buildings are gray hands pressing the sky away from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Megan. Megan, I just have, at this point, I'll just maybe get you to comment on some of your literary influences. In one of your poems, you talk about how one must forfeit the game, read books by women. Who are the poets who have influenced your work?
Well, all of my professors during my undergrad at UVic really influenced me, and I remember being sort of around a lot of nature poetry, nature writing there, and I was really struggling to write that type of poetry, and so my professor recommended I read Frederick Segal, who is like an older sort of urban poet, and that opened my world to, I guess poetry outside of the nature sphere, which I love nature poetry, but I was just really struggling to write it. So I guess um, Frederick Segal and the lunch poems, that like really iconic book, and by Frank O'Hara, sorry, and yeah, that I guess that New York School of Poetry I really like. Yeah. And then of course my friends in Vancouver who write poetry like Adele Barclay's really influenced me, for example. And Kayla Zaga as well. Her poetry is amazing.
Okay, well, thank you. I hope we can come back to you with a
Yep.
couple more questions later on. Next, it's my pleasure to welcome Nancy Jo Cullen. Her poetry and fiction have appeared in The Puritan, Grain, Filling Station, Plenitude, Prairie Fire, Arc, This Magazine, and Best Canadian Poetry 2018, Room, Journey Prize, and Best Canadian Fiction 2012. Nancy is the 2010 recipient for the Dwayne Ogilvie Prize for LGBTQ plus emerging writers. She's published 3 collections of poetry with Frontenac House and a collection of short stories, Canary, with Biblioasis. Her first novel, The Western Alienation Merit Badge, was shortlisted for the 2020 Amazon Canada First Novel Award. So welcome, Nancy Jo.
Hi. Thank you. Thanks for having me, for inviting me to the festival. I'm delighted to be here. And I guess I will also say that I am reading from Kingston, which is the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee, which is a hard word to say. And you should think I'd be able to say it by now. Anyway, we're living in dish with one spoon territory here. So technically, we should all be taking care of the land. Practically, that's not always the case. The land and one another. Anyway, the first poem I'm going to read is called Pentimento. Another day and the dog and cat are sleeping in the warmth of the fire. I think the sad lamp could try harder. I should never have let the habit of sugar develop in myself, in my children. Oh, the potato chips, such pimples, such eczema, such sensitive skins. We are alive in the living body of mobile technology. We can eat all the fried chicken we desire. It's just another ordinary day. If I put on mascara, I'll have to wash it off. I think that the lamp does a poor imitation of the sun. Now my children have lovers and bad habits. I have the glycemic index and shame. And billions of fat cells, all of us created in some likeness of the Eucharist. Those quiet mornings, my brother placed the marshmallow on my tongue. Body of Christ, he intoned. He is still a preacher, and I still seek the gesture of elevation, the transubstantiation of sugar to glory in this accident of substance I call my body. Now waiting for a band of pink to burn off this morning's lavender cloud. Sidewalks are dotted with ice patches. Snowbanks clot the roads, and the light casts its gilt patina on the stones of St. John's, like if God were a cinematographer, like if I believed in God. I'm thinking of my adolescent season, when everything made me weep, when crying was a gesture, not a feeling. So how's this for symbolism? The dog and I were walking toward the crow, and the crow was pecking at some frozen vomit. But first the crow was strutting toward her bounty, and I was thinking, look at that crow strutting on the sidewalk. I was thinking, don't screw with that crow. That crow would be happy to mess my dog up. For a second, I wondered what the symbolism of the crow might be, and then I thought the symbolism of the crow was unimportant. It was the crow who was important, pecking at the drunkard's excess. Now it belongs to the crow, who once slighted will never forget. I was a child afraid of the land, all that vast frozen. I was afraid of boys and their tongues and steep toboggan hills. I was afraid of going too fast, of being swallowed by the snow. I was a child who was afraid I was going to hell. Obviously, I was a child who was afraid of dying in a sledding accident on a treed hillside, where, anyway, I'd already been chosen for the ugly boy, not surprisingly, as I was the ugly girl. I was the girl who talked too much. I had no mystery. My teeth were crooked and I had no tits. I thought I'd never get my period, my truest bloody friend, those Saturday nights when I lied and said I had a babysitting job. Well, anyways, I repent nothing. A lumpish organ flutters in my chest, poor little fist, trying to avoid cliché. I know I am a sinner. I'm churlish and desolate, but drawn beneath our ordinary days is that wretched coffee and our first kisses standing outside your car before your long drive home. I'm going to read a poem now called When I Was Young, I'd Listen to the Radio. I think about Karen Carpenter sometimes. Sometimes I think about how good she seemed, how pure. When I saw Karen Carpenter on TV, I saw myself. Myself, were I better, had a smaller nose, was brunette, could sing like that and play the drums. When Karen Carpenter died, I didn't think of all my failed cucumber diets. I thought of the problem of the habit of obedience. I thought of how hard it is to kick the habit of obedience and how easy to disappoint our mothers, how fat we look in our favorite dresses. Richard M. Nixon was a fan which, even before history, couldn't have helped Karen's obsession with calories, couldn't have helped her desire to be more, to be less. Once both Karen Carpenter and I were young, we had no idea that we were beautiful. We had no idea that our suffering could change. Now I turn her rich voice up loud. It's taken me this whole life to recognize a good thing. I'm just going to read 2 more poems. This one is called A Thing on Beauty. Think of collagen as scaffolding for your face, and every time you consume sugar, you remove a piece of that scaffolding. And as collagen breaks down and becomes destroyed, wrinkles begin to appear, and you are left without the qualities that are typical of beauty. As you consume sugar, the scaffolding of your good looks crumble. Then the messy state of your soul becomes writ bold across your face. You, now without the qualities that are typical of beauty, find your individual unit of capital no longer in demand. The messy state of your soul is written boldly across your face. You crave too often and you are devoted to eating. Your individual unit of capital is no longer in demand, and women have been burned for less than that hair on your chin. You surrender to craving too often, plus you are devoted to eating. Your collagen is being destroyed, and the wrinkles, women have been burned for less than that hair on your chin, and other stories. Try not to think of collagen, the scaffolding for your face. And the last poem I'm going to read today is called Talking Head. Once I was the source, all fountain, all legs. Gone now the joy of lighting myself on fire, of running headlong into calamity. My kingdom for a pair of comfortable heels. My body is ever the enemy, ill-fated in the socialist project, ill-fated as the socialist project in the Parliament of Greed. Still, each year the birds get drunk on summer, and like us, we who invented love, us idiots, us bipeds with our roaring cunts, us idiots of desire, us fat drunks, the birds, beloved of the trees, return, as we must also return, to what we've lost, to our mums, to our bodies, and to the earth. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary Jo, I'm thinking about your poem TBH, and you say that the poem is an old bitch. And the poem is having to deliver some news that so little has really seems to have changed in terms of gender relations. And then that I'm thinking about the image of the teenagers pulling their braces off, and other images in your poems that suggest that although so little seems to change, perhaps there are sites of resistance. Do you see that? I mean, and do you see the poem as a site of resistance?
Yeah. I mean, for sure. I think the poem was, I was writing it in a moment of heightened panic just around changes globally and personally. And so, yes, I think it was a point of resistance. And yes, I think things are changing. I mean, things are better, so much better than when I was young, but also they're not better. Like the climate is just almost impossible to even think about. And as we sit through this storm and, so yes, things improve, and yes, my kid is still stalked by an ex, a year and a half later, and he's a scary mofo. And, so yes, things have changed, and yes, things haven't changed. He's a young guy. How has he learned nothing? So I don't know, but I know that resistance and persistence and all those corny words count for something, because I see the changes. I see young queer people have, as long as their families are open, I suppose, there's still all the problems of dealing personally as a queer person, but we have legal protections, at least in some cases, of course, not if you're trans, but we're moving in those directions. And so I'd say, yes, I think there's change and we're getting there, but it's never fast enough. It never feels fast enough.
Yeah, Definitely. Okay. Well, thank you, and hope to come back to you for another chat and a poem, hopefully. All right. I'm now going to introduce Jason Purcell. He is a writer and musician from Amishwakwachihikan, and I know I didn't pronounce that correctly, and hopefully he can help me with that. Treaty 6, Edmonton, Alberta, where they are also the co-owner of Glass Bookshop. As a chronically ill writer, Jason writes at the intersection of queerness and illness and is the author of the chapbook A Place More Hospitable, Anstruther Press. Swollening is their first full-length collection. Welcome, Jason.
Hello, it's so nice to be here. I'm cognizant of how echoey it is in here. We literally moved into this apartment yesterday, so I apologize if it's coming through in any type of way, but it's such a delight to be zooming in to this event with Word, and thank you to everyone involved in making this happen. It's such a delight. I am beaming in from Amiskwaciwâskahikan, Treaty 6, Edmonton, Alberta. I could show you the view. We have a gorgeous view of the city, but I won't. So I think I'll read just a few poems here today. And the one that I'll start with is called Birda Boys. And it's after an exhibition that I saw in an art gallery here in town in 2019 called Birda Boys. And it's a real exploration of what masculinity is kind of harnessed into in a place like Alberta. And the artist is called Kyle Terrence. And the show and the poem are both called Birda Boys. A masculinity that cannot go further, the length of it more than its language. Here, arms at the side and holding straight, down, forgetting the lick that breezes over, smoke plumes, gravity makes itself known over a scene, an absence, a way of being gendered, some unsound distance, smoking on the corner, pencil, and then something darker, marking you, exposing you, the weight of balls pulling you down towards something you can't see, but that bruises nonetheless. So the next poem I'll read is called Men in the Gut, which is also having to do with these similar themes. I was really interested in thinking through queerness and masculinity in Alberta, how it is that sort of I navigated those spaces growing up and what that has sort of left in me. So this one's called Men in the Gut. Scrape the inside of sleep, the belly wall tasting like yogurt, cooked broccoli, the emptiness of the organ leaving its sour trace on the tongue, escaping the body that wants to quit from the inside. Your sick self unlaces you, all the tethers sliced away. When I dream of this body ending, of opening the germ of the pain, I'm on the side of the road. My hands hold out my stomach, my second brain, to the men who already want me to die. This failing organ, quivering stomach with a ruby wound, where everything settles, kissing your soft vulnerability, your core a target, where it is so easy to be stabbed or shot. A punch to the gut. I anticipate violence here. One cell layer deep, shallow, spreading roots, a memory system in my body. On the side of the road, a drive-by for men homophobic in trucks swallowing spit. When I was a teenager, I let them disembody me, internalizing everything through the mouth, and now my stomach wants it out. I'm interested in self-diagnosis. When I dream, it is of trees budding from my stomach that will shade all the wounded men who masculinity failed, who will lay their oiler's caps on my wrists, say I'm sorry, and their fingers will touch without their being afraid. The next one I'm going to read is called Sleeping with House Guest. The vestibule of the mouth, guests milling, no room to even move the tongue, a whole new flora, licking fingers after turning sourdough, and on the carpet of your gums, Microbes dance or die, a duel in the Russian winter. Despite not being a novel, you imagine them spinning in their own dramas. Film develops, hangs in the snoring dry, dark room, your cavity you cannot pour into. It just takes a little light behind it to see, the way a dream does, how empty sirens are in sleep, and how sticky the smell of morning. Shuddering from your mouth after a night of mushroom hunting, you spore and hope some of them take among the fallen logs and ferns along the water of your tired and neglected gut, the acid yellowing, the stony scar tissue. You go down with your hands full and scattered, resting, a place only you know. You get there by swallowing. Carried down by pain, soft furs on the water, the few that are left and the ones who came without your permission. They move so much faster, grow impatient, want to see something violent. You cannot kill a parasite at the root. And I'll close with a poem that I hope ends kind of on a note of hope, and it's called Ruinous Women. Because in the footprints of ruinous women, rainwater floods and throats sing, and we are held by ruinous women. Surviving in my queer body only because of ruinous women. Generations of genders accumulate and stitch care up and down time, a return. All the women I know and love have ruined something for the better, ruined me for the better, made openings. The best parts of this world are the women who want to ruin it, so fiercely and attentively, gutting it with their starter and SCOBY. It is laughter from the future, finally the sound of the other side of shattering. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Oh, I'm thinking about some of the poems in your collection where you trace the roots of identity and illness and embodied experience to childhood. There's a line that really resonated for me in Kids in the Back Seat. It's growing up takes a little bravery. And yeah, I think we can, I see heads nodding in the audience. And for many of those poems, you really did, retrace some pathways back to childhood. And I think that can't be easy. There are many doors that close between us and our childhoods, through whatever the vagaries of memory and just not how difficult it is to experience that vulnerability. But wondered if you could just say a little bit about how you approach that and what it allows you as a poet to reconnect with those stages of life and open that up again for yourself and the reader.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually came to writing this collection while I was writing my master's thesis. It was sort of a way for me to start writing about the content in a way that didn't feel like I was writing about the content academically, like just sort of a way in. So I would start my writing sessions with, writing 20 minutes or 30 minutes of poetry, what turned out to be poetry, but at the time was just writing that I knew would not make it into the draft. But that sort of freed me up and helped me kind of theorize what I was getting at a little bit differently, because I was writing a thesis about queerness and illness. And I came to understand that sort of, if I were to theorize my own life, childhood wasn't something that I left behind or that I moved on from, but rather it was something that was like overlaying everything else. I think as a queer person, I mean, I don't know I'm sure it's like this for everyone, but as a queer person, I mean, so many of the person who I've become now or who I am, I feel like my decisions or my fears, my anxieties, my drives, all of these things are determined by what I was allowed or not allowed to do as a child, or who I allowed myself to be or not to be. And so it was sort of that exercise that allowed me to think about time a little bit differently as well, and not something that's as linear, but maybe something that rests atop my everyday life. So
Thank you. At this point, with the time that we have left, I'd like to open a discussion up to our audience members in case they have questions or comments for Megan, Jason, or Nancy Jo. We have time for that. If anyone has a question or a comment, they could maybe say it, and then I could speak it into the mic. Just give people a minute to collect their thoughts here if they do have. I think they're really they've had a lot to take in. All right, and anything? Yes. Okay. Right. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. So the question was just if that each of you could comment on the writing routine for you, the kind of schedule and flow and practice of for that helps your writing to happen on a regular basis. Maybe we could start with you, Jason, and then work back, Nancy, Jo, and then to Megan.
Sure. I guess when I wrote this book, my writing routine was very different because I had an amount of time where I had the tremendous privilege of just being able to write. I was funded to write. I was in a graduate degree that allowed me to do that. And many of us don't have that. And I don't have that anymore. I run a bookstore here in town now, and that takes up a lot of my time and mental energy as well. And so I've had to sort of release myself from this idea that I should have a writing routine at all. And instead, I sort of think about everything that I do as a way of making space for my writing in one way or another. And so I may not always have the time to sit down and write every day. I mean, I know that I don't. But if I have half an hour or an hour a week, I know that I can sort of lead up to that, and I can think throughout the week of what I might be after, or I can keep notes about what I want to do in that hour, and really make the most of it. I feel like time expands to sort of, or work rather, expands to fit the time allotted. And if you have all this free time where you think you're going to write, you may never ever write because you're like, oh. Whereas if you know you have an hour a day or an hour a week, I feel, at least in my experience, that I'm a lot more resourceful with that time.
Okay, great. Nancy, Jo, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I'd have to say that I agree with so much of what Jason just said. I ended up being a completely solo parent when my kids were 8 and 6. So, I had, it's important to say I had financial support so that people know I didn't accomplish anything because I'm so good that I had a cousin that literally paid for my children and I to live for those 10 years it took me to raise them. So I had time to stay home if my kids were sick, but I was still really like full on involved in whatever they were doing and just grieving and just a million things. So I wrote a bit, but without, like, I never had a door that could close. If a child wanted me, they pushed it open and talked to me. So I've had a chaotic writing practice, and that's the habit I'm in. I'm still cobbling together little part-time jobs at this late stage in life, and wondering, oh, have I wasted, did I make all the wrong choices? I didn't, but some days it rises up. And I still write around those kinds of things and walking my dog and doing my jobs. And so I forgive myself all those times I don't write, which I think is kind of what Jason was kind of saying. You can't do everything. You simply can't. And I'll tell you, if you have kids, you can just imagine that writing is going to go behind a lot of other priorities. And that's just the job, right? And so, yeah, I write when I can, and I still manage to write a lot, I would say, not as much as some people, but enough. And I meet regularly with group of writers over Zoom here in Kingston, which is so life affirming and heart affirming. And it's been so important through the pandemic. And often I come to those meetings without anything written. I just show up and be a writer with writers. And so that's, that's what I do. I do it as best I can. And, we don't make enough money to punish ourselves for having to make money in this world that we live in, where we just simply can't get by, and cost of living is outrageous these days, right? When I was young, you could get by on a lot less. So that's not the case anymore. Anyway, I guess I'm just repeating everything that Jason said, but yeah, forgive yourself and write as best you can when you can.
Thank you. Megan.
I'm trying to think if I have anything helpful to say. Writing is really difficult. The good thing I find about writing poetry is that it doesn't take me that long to actually write a poem. So if I can, I'll just work in verse. Sometimes I won't write for 3 or 4 months, and then I'll feel like writing. So I'll go as fast as I can to my computer and write one poem really quickly. That's just how I write. The other thing that helped me is finding other writers in my local community to even not write with or have workshops with, but just to talk to, and to go and get a beer with or a coffee with, and just, really feel motivated by the fact that other people literally exist who are writers. Sometimes it can feel really lonely and difficult. So those would be my two sort of things that might be helpful to someone else, which is writing in verse when you can, if you can, and then getting to know other people who are writers. Even 1 or 2 other people has really helped me.
Thanks, Megan. Okay, well, in the time that we have left for this session, I definitely want to thank the staff and all the wonderful volunteers at Word Vancouver this year who make this possible. I want to let people know that they can visit our official bookseller, Iron Dog Books, and because we have our authors remotely, it's still possible, I think, to find the books. At least check out the book sales tables. And I think a really wonderful way to end this session would be just to hear from all 3 poets again. I'm putting you on the spot a little, maybe a shorter poem. If you could just take us out with your powerful words, that would be the best. And maybe if we started with Megan again and went to Nancy, Jo, and Jason, I'm pretty sure we have enough time for one more poem from each of you. How does that sound?
Well, okay. Do you want me to start?
Yeah, please. That would be great. Thank you.
Okay. This poem is called I'm in Love with You. I feel pretty cool eating squid ink brioche with sea urchin pate at the bar. I read somewhere that you can fall back in love with someone you've fallen out of love with. You just have to love the life you built together more than the love that leaves. I fell out of love with you yesterday when you forgot to print out my poems at your studio. I fell out of love with you when my pants fit differently. I fell back in love after that lizard died on TV and you said the lizard wasn't dead, just sleeping. My landlord tells me in the elevator about his sympathy morning sickness. When his pregnant wife vomits, he vomits too. I wish you loved me that much. I wish you would vomit next to me. I would vomit next to you.
Thank you, Megan. All right, Nancy, Jo, you're up next.
Okay, I'm going to read a poem called Glorious Bitches. Once your boyfriend squeezed into our living room once your boyfriend squeezed into our living room through the window we left open just wide enough for the cat. 35 years later, he rings into this present moment, unbidden. though we're not on mushrooms and being there is not on the late movie, and we have free cross-country calling, and we can no longer party like we used to, and I've put in my hearing aids, so the tone of your beloved voice is clear. It seems impossible that we are no longer those young women with a taste for the extreme, as if pain was truer than peace, and only knuckleheads settled for the quiet life. LOL, right? Those losses we collected like thrift store cowboy boots until we finally submitted to the daydream of motherhood. Such a wicked surprise, that monotony, and how suddenly we were so fucking boring, so tired, so disappointed, so undesirable, so undesiring. We are always returned to our miscalculations. And now your fragile old boyfriend is clawing back through time, inserting himself through the looping monster of the internet, literally crazy as a loon, as our mothers would have said, his boundaries as shite as ever. But for a moment, we become glorious bitches, and we laugh at the damages, his and ours. What were we ever thinking? Then you give me a brief rundown on sativa and indica, because don't we deserve some relief? Didn't we raise our children, all the while our hearts pounding in our throats, those delicate disasters we cannot shrug off, only to find we have failed as bigly as our own mothers, and our ex-lovers are old or dead or mad. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. And Jason, you're up next.
Okay, I will read a poem called My Gender. A cookbook, half open on the couch that blows, the soft herbs drip in sensual memory, coming hither on the teeth, the way the coconut and its milk announce themselves exactly as they are, its solids on the fingers. I would like to substitute myself thoughtfully, as when forgetting to pick up cilantro and so basil instead infusing the meal at the last minute, when it all seems like it could be too late. A little change, a swap, into the same. It's silly to make this into an equation, but here, scribbled on the counter as I cook dinner for only myself, no one here to see how I stir, how I adapt what I've been given, the recipe as it should be, and fine that way, and how I've always been taught to eat it, but then to learn I prefer this other way. Thank you.
Okay, well, again, thank you to our three wonderful poets. Thank you, Megan Fennya Jones, Nancy Jo Cullen, and Jason Purcell for joining us here today. I'd like to thank Adam on tech. It's all working out so well, despite all our concerns. And thanks to the audience members, and again to Word Vancouver for bringing us all together in this fascinating hour that we've had. All right, and that's it. Have a wonderful rest of the festival.